welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Andertons TV. I'm joined by Guillaume from Two Notes.
Hey.
A wonderful company, really one of the pioneers, I guess, of load boxes and speaker emulation and using IRs and all that kind of stuff. So welcome.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you
It's
for
your
having me.
first time, isn't it, on Andertons TV?
Absolutely.
So we've known each other for a few years, but never had you on the show. And we've asked you on today to talk about Reload 2. Let me just give you a quick, this is what the setup is here. I'm plugged this Les Paul into the front of this Marshall amplifier. We're going to use a few Marshall amplifiers today. Pretty much everything on here is cranked. So even though this is only a 20 watt amplifier, that would have been blisteringly loud. So we're running it into Reload 2. Guillaume will talk about that in a second. We're using the Strymon Big Sky MX, and we're running into these two 112 cabinets at the bottom. So do you want to give us a quick rundown of what is Reload 2, how are we using it here, and why have I just managed to get such a killer sound out of this amplifier at, you know, essentially almost like a bedroom level?
So, well, Reload 2, you can see it as an extra volume knob after your amp. You're correct that this amp, even if it's not that powerful, it would still be quite loud. So there are many situations where you want to be in control of your stage level or bedroom level, or even in the studio. So that's when you plug Reload 2 after your amp, in between the amp and those two cabinets. What's specific about Reload 2 is the fact that you can either lower the level of your amp or increase the level of your amp. For example, you have that lunchbox that you like, that was perfectly at home, but you play on stage and you play with a drummer, and you may want to be a little bit louder. Just bring this and it will help you do that. Just be a tiny bit louder. The cool thing about this setup, I think, is the fact that I actually don't know if those amps have an FX loop, but they certainly don't have a stereo FX loop.
And the vintage versions of these obviously wouldn't have effects loops. So even the very early JCM 800s wouldn't have had an effects loop.
Yeah,
so
my Plexi doesn't have an FX loop and doesn't have a master volume. So we use the stereo FX loop here. And the way the Reload works lets you actually drive two separate cabinets with a stereo amp. So what you have in that box is a state-of-the-art load box. So your amp is loaded by something that looks a lot like the impedance of a cabinet. So the amp believes it's plugged into a cabinet, and we designed that load box with Celestion to make sure it complies with what they think is a good impedance for an amp. And after that, we re-amplify that level. That's why you have a volume knob here, whether less volume or more volume. And we do it with a stereo power amp, so you can use that Strymon stereo FX. And a lot of people have said already that, well, I don't need stereo. I mean, I'm fine with mono. And you know what? In the studio, most of the time, I'm fine with mono. But as a player, the minute you try the stereo stuff and you have just a tiny bit of stereo spread with your tone, it's a different experience.
Now, I'm fairly familiar with some of the alternatives to Reload 2. And I want to kind of go through why you think Reload 2 offers something perhaps superior or certainly alternative. So if we start off with like the very, very original and still probably hyper affordable kind of load boxes is a non-reactive, just big power soak that sits in between the amplifier and the speaker. So yeah, we got no built-in effects loops to those, no recording outputs, no nothing, just a way of making a loud amplifier quieter.
Yeah, it's a big resistor.
So why, perhaps, and then I suppose the next generation of that was a reactive load version. Could you just explain to me, so what's the difference between non-reactive and reactive, and then again, why is Reload 2 in your opinion, superior to either of those kinds of technologies?
Yeah. So the idea behind passive resistive attenuation, so that's what you described, like could be just a big knob
Yeah.
or just a big resistor.
Yeah.
That's actually what the industry has been using for a year to test hi-fi amplifier. I mean, you don't want the loudness, you just want to make sure the amp is working. And in the industry, you would plug them into this. Same way, I use a lot of automotive analogy. You would put a car, on those big wheels just to try out the power, but the car is not moving, right? So you can think of those devices like the load boxes. It's like that kind of big thing where you try the car on. And the resistor, if we work, the issue is this. On a tube amp, whether it's guitar or hi-fi, on a tube amp, the impedance of the cabinet will have an impact on how the tube behaves. And that's something that most people actually don't know. But since you know that, the shape of the impedance will have an impact on the sound of your amp. That's also why when you try different cabinets, you may have different sounds because the cabinet or the speakers are different, but also because the interaction between the amp and the cabinet changes depending on the cabinet, which starts to get complicated. So the resistors thing is fine, but it presents a fixed, let's say 8 ohms impedance across all the frequencies. And some amps don't like that much, especially in the low end or the high end. They are used to have a higher frequency. And it may be taxing on the amp, or it may be asking the amp for too much power. And that's usually not great. So you may wear out the tubes a bit faster, or break the amp. On reactive designs, you try to replicate the actual impedance of the cabinet. So what is the impedance? The impedance is actually a resistance that will change with the frequency. So it will have a specific shape with usually a resonance, and then it will go up in the high frequency. The reason for that specific shape is just how a speaker is built. You have mechanical parts, it's moving. When you move in one direction, the speaker wants to come back in the other direction. So all that mechanical apparatus can be simplified or represented by an electrical impedance. So that's what we do with those devices. So by being reactive, we are getting closer to actually how a speaker works. And the amp will prefer that. To make it a tiny bit more complicated, not all amps are sensitive to the load. Some modern, let's say high-gain amps, usually you will design them so they are not that sensitive to the load. Solid-state amps are not that sensitive to the load. So let's say if you play vintage amps or mainly vintage amps, you will feel a difference depending on the impedance shape or the shape of the impedance, whether you play resistive, reactive, or that type of reactive where we've tried with Celestion to really match not one specific kind of speaker, but some kind of an average speaker and an average cabinet. Because you know what? The cabinet changed the impedance as well. Yeah. Or the amount of air you have. If it's an open back cabinet, it will also change the impedance. So what you need to remember here is the fact that we've tried to match a real speaker and cabinet with the help of Celestion, and then add a very cool power amp so you don't have any issue playing a small amp in a big venue.
So let's say, I'm going to come back to that. So we've got a reactive load box in here that is obviously trying to replicate how a speaker would put a load on the amp. Now, I've used, and I'm pretty, I've had some reasonably good results with things like the Oxbox or the Iron Man 2 as just a straightforward reactive load.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to say, and we've probably experienced this quite a lot on the Oxbox, is as an attenuator, as you increase the attenuation, so you want to lower the volume of the amplifier artificially or via the load box, you very quickly lose top end. Yeah. So I was saying that the Oxbox, and I appreciate you probably don't want to talk negatively about it's products. It's a good product. The Oxbox has like a 5-position attenuator.
Yeah.
And position 5 is pretty similar to the regular amplifier. I have to apologize. They're digging up the road outside, so if you can hear pneumatic drills in the background, I'm pretty sure the guitar mics won't pick them up, but our lapels probably will. So yeah, on number 5, it's not terribly noticeable. Number 4, it's still quite usable. Doesn't have a huge dramatic effect on the tone, but you've only lost maybe 10% of the volume by this time. As soon as you're on position 3, 2 or 1, where you are losing, 30, 40, 50% of the volume, it starts to sound a lot like this. And I suppose ultimately, in my mind, I'm just hoping that somebody designs a reactive load box that one day doesn't do that. But at the moment, you're coming at this in a different way. You're sort of saying that you've put a separate power amp in here, a little bit like Boss do with the Wazza tube. So just tell us why you think having a separate power amplifier with a straight load box allows you to achieve better results than an attenuator as such.
So what the attenuator does is that every time you go a step up, meaning more attenuation, it will increase the resistance that is seen by the amp. So the amp will work every time a bit less like it's supposed to work. And the direct impact to that is that you will lose the top end of the sound. So of course they're using, and we do the same with the Captor X, we're using a network of tiny reactive components to try and get the high end back, but you can never get it properly back. With passive, it's incredibly hard.
Right.
And the thing is, with some amp, you will notice it. Some others, you won't really notice what's going on. But the passive way, it's incredibly hard to design something that will work all the time. We do it differently here, and we were doing it with the previous reload unit, by just presenting the same impedance to the amp. The amp doesn't know you're attenuating. It's just loaded by a very good load box. And then you take that tiny signal we get from the amp and you re-amplify it, which means this is not an attenuation.
No.
That's a volume knob. It's a totally different concept. I did not invent that concept. You had, like, even in the people like Van Halen would slave amps, like use one amp to boost another amp and get more power, usually not to attenuate. So we did not invent the concept, but we were among the first to use that concept in that type of product. So it's really a different approach that I think is better.
Okay, so very, very simply, you've got the option to take a very loud amplifier and make it quieter, or a very quiet amplifier and make it louder through this device, which I suppose is one of the main differences between a straight attenuator and this. Now, as I said before, Boss have had a product on the market doing something similar to that. I'm sure you'll have your technical reasons as to why yours is better. But in terms of pure features, where this gets pretty cool is the way you've added a stereo element to it. So just talk us through that, and then I'll do some playing and we'll try it through these other amplifiers and stuff.
Absolutely. So, well, first of all, it's an all analog devices. That's important. If we talk about other devices on the market which have cab sim, this one doesn't feature a cab sim. The cab sim is done with Genome or a plugin. But this is a pure analog device. So we wanted to, to me, the user for that type of product is either someone who wants a top-of-the-line attenuation or volume control, or someone who just do recording and they don't want any latency. They will use the DAW to process the cab sim after the recording. So it's just analog. But on the stereo side of things, I think what's very cool here, you have some tonal control. Actually, what people will hear is that we added a tiny bit of depth and presence just to add a bit of makeup on the amp. But the stereo FX loop lets you do a few cool things. First, since it can be a series of parallel, you could have your, and I think that's what we have here, kinda, you can have your dry signal in the middle of the stereo field and the stereo FX on the sides if you pan them all the way out. And that's a cool thing. But you can also do a real wet, dry, wet with that. If you take an amp that has, let's say, 2 8 ohms output, you will use 1 8 ohm output into one of those tiny cabinets. And from this unit, 2 other cabinets just for the effects. And you actually replicate what people like Steve Vai or other people using wet, dry, wet on stage do. They have their main tube amp, and then they have a stereo power amp that's slave to the main amp where they have only the effects. And that's pretty addictive. I love that kind of sound.
Let's, okay, so that's in a nutshell, load box, stereo power amplifier, stereo effects loop, a little bit of EQ. As I said, I really want to hear it, but the very final thing before we do that is, unlike pretty much everything else I think that have gone onto the market like this, you have elected not to put cabinet emulation in it. So you're shipping it with your software emulation product Genome. So in the studio, you'd run your amps through this, and you'd run Genome through, into
Your
Logic
DAW.
or whatever, into your DAW, and then you'd do your speaker emulation like that. Live, if you want to give the sound man just XLR cables, you are going to have to buy a secondary product to do that, right?
If you need, so any kind of cabinet emulator will work. We provide the Opus device that can do that. But I think live, a lot of people will use that as an attenuator, a very good attenuator.
Yeah.
I think that's the main purpose for that device. And you know what? I see more and more live people using FX, like they have computer racked into the system, or even plugging into the consoles, and they will just use the plugin in there. I see that more and more.
That's cool. Right, so let's have a little listen here. I'm going to turn the effects off, and then what I'm actually going to do, I've got essentially both channels cranked on this, which is crazy loud. So if I drop these channels back to a kind of volume that you might typically be able to use this amplifier at home, and we just turn up here, this is more. Which is a nice sound, but I guess what these amplifiers are famous for is being cranked. So this is where you kind of need your attenuator now. So I've got everything up maximum. And the reason I think some of these amplifiers have become so classic is, you are then into your. There's no distortion pedal, that's just literally the amplifier sounding killer. And we're incredibly low volume. And I suppose I'm trying to do this from memory, but my recollection of using something like the Oxbox to get this much volume reduction is more muffled.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't have the sort of the clarity there. I really like also the sort of there is no latency. I'm not actually entirely sure there's any real latency on Oxbox either, but. Now, of course, these modern Marshall studios have had effects loops built in, but as we mentioned at the beginning, if I had an original JTM or an original Plexi, or could be any number of old vintage amplifiers, old AC30s, whatever, you've got no effects loop, and then it does all become a pain in the bum. So Ox would have some effects built into it if you wanted to use the speaker emulation, but if you just wanted to hear, yes, but you can't have it through the cabs. So this is where I guess, the way you did it on original Reload and how Boss have done it, and this taking it to another level with the stereo effects is different, because I can now have I'm using an excessive reverb, but the one I wanted to find, which I think is the one before or the one after. I've now picked again, these are all slightly over the top. Let me take the mix down on this here, but this is again a stereo. I'm fascinated, of course, by your wet dry and wet dry wet thing, because it's a stereo send and return on here.
Yeah.
I absolutely could just run one amplifier, but with effects on one side, not on the other, and just get a wet dry kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or as you say, if I ended up with more speakers attached to one side, I could do the wet dry wet. That's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. All off of one amp, which is super. Yeah. But here we go. I'm enjoying how much it seems to want to behave like a loud amplifier, even though we're not loud. And I mean that in terms of, I know the feedback is more of a physical thing. You need a certain element of volume to do that. But it feels like it wants to go, like it's a, you know. I must admit, there's something. I mean, I sort of feel like guitar players of my age will have grown up using valve amplifiers, and it would have been totally normal. And I don't want to sound like just like an old man, because I know young players will tell me all the time about how amazing the plugins are and all that kind of stuff is. I still believe there's just something so immersive about the way a valve amplifier responds under your fingers and everything, that you just can't. And again, obviously, to get the best out of a valve amplifier, you want to turn it up a little bit, drive those valves a little bit, and then of course you need some device to tame that craziness. But I mean, I think that sounds absolutely. Could you show us what these EQ controls do? Maybe I'll go back to that standard reverb.
So it's pretty straightforward. I will just switch them off. So we try and replicate what you have on many amps, like depth and presence. Depth will act on the low end response, and presence more a bit more the upper end response of the guitar. And I always talk about makeup for your amp. I mean, your amp sounds good. Like, we can try it with everything off.
So these aren't offers. So you just mean this is like zero
here.
So that we're just hearing the amp, not hearing anything. Oh man, I tell you, I remember the very first time that Rabir played his Victory Kraken with so much gain and power, but so lightly picked, and it's a really different sound to a very clean. It's clean, but with this crazy level of harmonics in it.
And you know it can get crazy at any time.
And that's what I'm kind of. I think at this level of gear, it is all about really feeling like you're just getting that extra 2% or 3%. You know, it's not necessarily about, you know, buying your first distortion pedal and going, oh, look, the difference. You know, it is a sort of.
It's not as obvious.
Yeah, but I think if you've got a good amplifier and you want to use it in your studio and control it, you want all these kind of tools at your disposal.
Yeah, and there is no really cheap version of that. That's something that's important. But first of all, you need to protect your amp. You don't want to probably save money on an attenuator. That's probably a bad call. There are things that we don't talk about, that we have security system in there in case it's overheats. So since you can have rack ears and you can go on tour with that, or at least rack it in your studio, we make sure that the heat management in the unit is proper. But we've been doing that for nearly 20 years now. Yeah. But those are things that you don't see when you put that much money in there, but I can guarantee you those are important aspects of it, because you can damage the amp. You can probably damaging this is hard. Like, you need to push it incredibly hard, but you could damage the amp. So people should spend a bit of money on the attenuation. So let me show you something that's cool.
We'll see these. We're going to do the EQ, weren't we? So
these first. So that's the Mojo, and the Mojo it's a cool trick. The DAW will not record that because it's just for the speakers. So that's something we developed just to add a little bit of like if you were playing loud. So we are not very loud here, but it will just add a tiny bit of something. We'll see if you pick it up.
Okay, so this is just an on-off switch called Mojo.
Yeah.
Okay. So it scooped it maybe a little bit,
Yeah,
or
tiny bit.
took a little bit of the treble away. Did it add some gain, maybe, or not?
It off.
So it smooths it, doesn't it? It sort of takes away some of the more in-your-face rawness of the sound.
What we try to do is because the human hearing does not work the same at low level and high level. So we try and compensate. So for some frequencies you're missing when you play at low level. So it's a kind of a loudness effect.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when you play it very loud, you don't really hear what Mojo is doing. But when you play like really, I think we're not at bedroom level. I think bedroom level is even lower than that.
Let me just say we have the decibel meter. Yeah, that's quiet. I mean, a normal video for us is we're 100 dB, I would have thought like that.
Oh, wow,
so,
okay.
And I think we've generally said anything around about the 75, 80 level on that meter, bearing in mind that's over in the corner.
Yeah, it's not in front of
that would be just us talking kind of level, you know.
Yeah.
I think most people would accept that the volume that I'm playing at the moment is a home, like not.
Oh yeah, home,
not,
absolutely.
Yeah, it is. You might annoy the person in the room next to you, but you won't annoy the person in the house next to you. You know, it's just like a normal, guitar level.
Just playing unplugged is enough to annoy someone next to you. So.
I do like that. So that Mojo is a little bit like just to make it sound a little bit smoother and fatter at lower volumes.
Yeah, it's
cool.
And this is more like, let's say, surgical settings where I think let's try that.
Yeah. You can hear it, sure.
Yeah.
Oh man, the thump, it's really, I have to say as well, these little baby Marshall cabinets, I'm not normally a huge fan of Marshall 1x12s, but the Studio Series cabs they've made are really good, I think.
I'm impressed, actually.
Yeah, and stereo as well, just adds something. I am enjoying this. I want to see how it works with some of the other amps.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the middle one here has a master volume on it, so perhaps this is slightly less about buying amplifiers with master volumes and more about amps that don't have master volumes. But I suppose it depends how much you just like the sound of your amp.
Yeah,
really loud, doesn't it?
The minute you want, even with very high gain amps, and I've played a lot of high gain amps, I think my preference would be to be at that sweet spot where you start hearing the distortion coming from the power amp and a little bit of sag, and you need to push the volume to get that. If you don't push the volume, you will not get the power supply to just crumble under the load. I mean, you need that. And to me, that's the main difference, especially if you're into recording and you are searching for that, that extra 2%.
It's exactly that. I think it's when you really listen to, like a guitar sound, like an AC/DC kind of guitar sound.
Oh yeah, 100% tube, power amp.
Yeah, and you realise that it's not about just turning your preamp gain up, is it? It's about getting that fatness. Right. So should we just try this with a different amplifier? Let's just see what it sounds like. Hang on a second then. Okay, so we're in the 800 now. You can hear much more modern gain sound, but this is interesting. So this control here is the master volume, And here you can hear how much gain is introduced through driving the power amp more. So if you wouldn't mind, whilst I'm just playing, just slowly turn that master volume. It's actually not even introducing that much more volume, is it? It's just introducing
gain. A lot of it.
Yeah, so you really, you don't want, well, it's just different kind of sounds. You can have your preamp gain. And that's such a great sound. And we're so quiet. That's such a good, tight rock sound. Again, you put a tube screamer in front of that and you're just like, away you go. That's the sound of a whole era, isn't it? I mean, again, and you can crank the craziness out of this, and I presume it's just not that loud, is it? All those pinched harmonics are kind of coming out, and we're really not. I am impressed, because I do love this. You know, I mean, half the point of the whole studio series is that you can get JCM 800 sounds at 20 watts, right? But 20 watts driven is still not home use, is it? I mean, that's still a gigging amplifier. I think that sounds great. And again, we can probably still do that whole, get it pretty clean, I would have. It's like having a channel foot switch literally built into your guitar. I'm such a huge fan of clean guitar sounds by having an amp with tons of gain and just turning the volume down. Yeah. Let's try the last one over here, and then what we'll also do is show you what it sounds like straight into the desk using Genome as well.
So we're adding a lot of that right now.
So yeah, the Super Lead gunned does have probably, it will go a bit flubby, so you probably don't need to add any depth in. You might want some presence though. But again, it just sounds great.
Wow, that's a lot of gain, actually.
There's so much gain out of this thing. I mean, I kind of feel like...
okay, let's go for it.
Well, the reason I want to do this, people will inevitably read through the spec of this and they'll go, yes, you've used a Class D ICE module in here. And I think I can't decide if, first and foremost, and I've probably said this loads of times before, that the D in Class D has nothing to do with digital.
Nope.
It's purely and simply that I think amp manufacturing have gone A, B, C, D.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's a real shame that we've kind of ended up on it. It'd be better if we went to Class E, because then at least people wouldn't talk about it. So it's not a digital thing, but it is a very lightweight, super high efficient sort of switch mode type power amp that most brands are using now if they want something small and light. But what have you done here or what have you tweaked in terms of the input to it, or anything about it to just give it a more familiar feel? Because like I say, I I don't feel like I'm playing through some sort of Class D power amp. Maybe it's in my mind or something anyway.
It's not. I'll explain to you why. You need to remember that the source is still a tube amp. So the interaction between your guitar and the tube amp doesn't change. The reason why we use that type of amp is that we want the power amp in there to be faster than this. So when you have transient, it needs to be faster. So we need to find a type of amp here. It's like a door. This is the sound of your tube amp, and I want the door to be significantly bigger. So faster, more bandwidth, less distortion. And that's what I can do with this.
You mean a door like a front door, not a door like a DAW?
A door,
now
sorry,
I'm getting confused.
Come on, don't make fun of my accent.
No. We would say door and door the same as well, but you mean you want like a gateway, not...
Absolutely.
I understand. Okay.
And a highway and a bike on it.
Exactly. All right. Well, that's fine. So,
and you have this setting here that's a little bit important, and because you don't want to push that too much into the yellow here.
Yeah.
You want to stay in the green-blue side of things because you don't want to distort the power amp in there.
Yeah.
Power amp needs to stay clean, and again, that's something that's kind of easy to do with modern Class D. People hated the Class D from 20 years ago, and I agree with them. But today we have very good solutions, and we tried a lot of them. Honestly, what I wanted the same amp that I had in my very expensive studio monitors.
Yeah.
And that's the same.
Yeah.
I want something that will let every tiny bit of tone that comes from here go through there.
I think that's where it's important guitar players understand the difference. So a valve amplifier, you can hit the front end as hard as you want, you turn the thing up as loud as you want it, and your ears just find the spot that you like it. And actually, I think most of us as guitar players are used to going, you know what, the more I hit that front end, the more I get that lovely kind of compression. And Class D, for me, it's really important that you hit the front end with the correct level and you probably accept that. If you go over maybe 2/3 or 75% of its maximum output, you're probably entering into a point where the amp is not giving you the cleanest. So I think for me, again, make sure you understand how much input you're putting into Class D. Buy a Class D amplifier that's at least twice as loud as you really need it to be. And then I think you'll be really happy with the kind of results that you get. But
No, I mean, you really, and that's the thing between tube amps and solid state amps where people think the watts are different, right? They are the same. It's just that's the way you interact with the unit. Like this, let's say it's 20 watt, but actually if I measure it, I will probably get 35
maybe
or more. Because when you max it out and you get some kind of a square wave, that's a lot of power. But you don't want the solid states to go full square wave because most people will hate the sound. You don't like the sound. I don't like that sound. You don't want that. So we actually designed those to avoid getting there. We have a bit of, I think, nice soft clipping happening here, but you don't want to go hard clipping on solid state usually. Unless it's let's say a pedal. On a pedal, yeah, sure, you can do that, but you still have the tube amp after it.
Yeah. Well, look, okay, so I think we've kind of demonstrated it with 3 different sounding amplifiers, albeit they're all Marshalls. I'm sure we'd have got some fun results if we'd have used a Fender or a Vox or whatever, but... So everything you've heard in this video so far has been the microphones on the cabinets. So hopefully pretty similar to what we're hearing in the room. Now what we're going to do though is we're going to lose the cabinets and we're going to run the DI. So you've got 2 XLR outputs on the back. We're going straight into our interface, and then we're running Genome, I think, as a plugin within Logic, right?
Absolutely.
So we found a Friedman IR. And the guys have basically set it up so that it's an emulation of a Friedman 412 with a 57 and a Royer 121 on it. So, but if you know anything about IRs, you'll know you've got a zillion IR options that you could play around with. But here we go. We're hearing it now just through our studio speakers in the room. I mean, it's... So I suppose ultimately, and I feel this always on this, as a guitar player, you want to hear these as loud as you possibly can, not studio monitors really, really quietly. But it still feels, which I suppose it should because I'm plugged into an amp, it still feels like I'm playing a tube amplifier, which is the point, right? And these EQ controls still work, right? The effects loop still works, presumably, yeah, of course. I mean, I guess once you're into a DAW, you can do whatever you want with all your effects on and everything.
Genome has plenty of effects.
Does it as well? Let's just find something a bit more crazy. I mean, I don't know this. I don't know all the presets on this Big Sky as well as I could, but I just love. This is the sound I want to get. You know, I just want to have an amp sound that. It's just fat and rich and good, isn't it? So yeah, well look, that last little bit you heard there, as I said, is the DI from this, and it comes with a copy of Genome for free.
Yeah.
And I guess so. The only thing we haven't really tried to emulate here is what might it sound like with a third party, whether it's an Opus or whatever, a speaker sim. Yeah. But if you've used speaker sims before, you'll have an idea of what sort of idea you can get with that. I did want to finish off, of course. We've demonstrated this entirely by putting a valve amplifier into it. Mm-hmm. It has a left and right line input.
Correct.
So if somebody did just want to use this as a straight power amp, like an alternative to like a Seymour Duncan Power Stage 700 or something like that, 100% you could do all that. You could still use the effects loops. You could still use the line outputs, all that kind of stuff.
You can have a bass DI on one channel into one cabinet and a guitar amp into the other.
So completely discrete left and right.
That's dual mono. So you could have two totally different instruments in there, or use that just as a basic power amp with an FX loop though. There is a thing about the FX loop is the fact that the FX loop in the amp is usually before the power amp, right? In terms of how the layout is in the amp. But when you put the effects after the power amp, it doesn't get the reverb and delay don't get distorted by the power amp in the amp. So it's a different sound. To me, it's closer to what you get when you record in the studio and you have the effects in the auxiliary. I do prefer that kind of sound because it's a little bit cleaner, but that's also a difference with a basic, let's say, mono FX loop.
Yeah. Well, no, that's very cool. I like the look of it as well. I like the way you've worked it so that it can sit on top of an amplifier with a handle and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it would look out of place in any sort of studio or on an amp. But like you say, you've got a rack mount kit comes in the box, so you can choose to do that if you would prefer.
And if your amp is very tiny, you can put it on top.
Put it on the top, yeah, it's a good shout. All right, well, look, these are going to be in the shops somewhere towards the end of March, I think, maybe beginning of April. Yes. We'll see. We're at the sort of beginning of March right now. And in the UK, I think we're going to be paying around about the $850 mark. Was that right? Okay.
Yes.
Well, look, anyway, links to go to the Andertons website will be in the description below this video. We'll certainly be stocking them, and you'll be able to get all of the technical spec and the up-to-date price by clicking on the link below. But Guillaume, thank you so much for coming over. I've enjoyed any excuse to play guitar amplifiers is a good one. So I've enjoyed this video. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Au revoir.